Well, tempting as it is to follow Virginia in her global to local Melbourne spat between feminist sisters voyage, a mighty stretch of distance she's covered there, I would like to stick actually to the topic which I would suggest affects us here and now, which is to argue not just against the proposition that feminism has failed, because my desire and my conviction is to argue something far more positive, which is that feminism, as I know it, has done a lot more than not failed. Rather, it has succeeded so powerfully and changed things for women so fundamentally that we are now really in that comfortable position of scarcely even noticing it anymore. Because the achievements of feminism, I think, have spun themselves into the fabric of our lives. What we do notice, and let's concede this straight up, is that the reality can fall short of the dream, or to put it a homelier way, because feminism really is a practical, everyday thing. It's not some great conspiracy, it's how we live. When the shoe pinches sometimes, and it hurts. And this, I suspect, is what my opponents will continue to dwell on tonight. The bits that went wrong, or that went too far, or where things benefiting the majority but they've caused discomfort, maybe even distress, and that's obviously disturbing to the minority. But this tends to happen in a lively, active democracy. The deeper truth, I would argue, is that we have, as a society, moved a long way in the past 40 years or so towards acceptance of the central feminist principle, which is not so very radical a principle, which is that we should have economic, social and political equality of opportunity between the sexes. There you go, there's the bogey. I don't think so, but I do think that we have moved there because I was around 40 or so years ago. That very kind reference to 26 years ago, I think I haven't updated my CV enough. And because I've seen the changes, and that's really what I want to talk to you about tonight. Not a list of achievements, a tick list, important as these individual achievements are, but I want to take a personal view, a working girl's view, and look at what feminism has done for me, and I hope for you, and remind you a bit of what it was like before, not in some horrible carping way, and we should be grateful for what the feminists did, not at all. But I do think it's important to remember that one of the biggest complaints made today about feminism is that we have so much choice. What are we going to do with all this choice? Well, I would suggest to you that this is a dilemma that our mothers and our grandmothers might have wished they had a chance to face. And that we do have these choices, I think, is a measure of feminism's health, not its failure. It's a particular pleasure for me to come here tonight in this hall, because it's true, I was 16 when I first came here, at the very start of my journalism career, a long time ago. But it was relevant because it was here for the first time that I had a whisper of what this thing that we're debating tonight, feminism, could or might be. The event was the launch of the It's Time campaign by long ago Labor leader Gough Whitlam, who was standing right there. But what I remember most clearly about that night wasn't the slogan, but his speech, which he opened by addressing not the comrades, not the more familiar ladies and gentlemen, but he stood here and he addressed the men and women of Australia. Now, he wasn't the first one to use the phrase, I accept that, but it was the first time I'd heard it. And I was a green girl. I'd just come from years locked up in an all-girls boarding school in the country, where it won't surprise you, given the time and place, neither the concept nor the word feminism were ever used. We knew about Marianne Faithfull, and we quite liked Joni Mitchell, but Betty Friedan, Germaine Greer, never heard of them. We didn't know much about politics either, except there was this sort of smallish Prime Minister. We'd heard about that. His name was William McMahon, and what he did was he bought this thigh-high split dress that he gave to his wife so that she could walk up the steps of the White House and everyone could ogle her, which we thought in the boarding house was a pretty cool thing. She looked spectacular, and he needed the publicity. And now, here was this white-haired giant accompanied by a very outspoken brown-haired giant, and they were talking to me. I was one of the women of Australia. I was an equal And it was an electrifying thought. And something went whoosh in my head, which was my own little wind of change, I guess, and the possibility, the thrilling possibility occurred to me for the first time that things didn't have to be as they'd always been. And this, for me, is the core argument for feminism, and where I would say it has succeeded most spectacularly, which is in the mind. In our minds. It has changed our state of mind and made a whole lot of things possible. Why, I'd like to know, is this so often overlooked in our discussions of feminism, as though it's some small thing, some little immaterial achievement to change the whole landscape of our minds for girls and women. It's a big thing. And for this working girl, it became a guiding principle that I deserved and I was entitled to the same opportunities as my male colleagues. And not just that I would get equal pay, important as that was, but the most important thing was to realise the time was coming when I would not be blocked, that I would get an open chance alongside men, and this wasn't the world I had known. I mentioned mothers and grandmothers before. Well, let me tell you about a conversation I had just a little while back with my mother. She grew up in Britain. She was the only daughter of a military man who went on to become commander of the Royal Marines. So you think he'd have been pretty proud when she was in year 10. Someone said, one of her teachers, if you work hard enough, because you're a bright girl, you might get to Oxford one day. And she was pretty chuffed. And she told her father, a good man, but a man of his times, and his reaction was, that won't happen. No one will marry you. No man will want a wife like that. He took her out of school the following year and sent her to a finishing school where she was taught to sew and to type and to make perfect hospital corners. And the saddest thing when she told me this recently, I felt, wasn't it just that it happened, is that she wasn't even angry. She wasn't even upset. It was unfortunate, but that was the way things were. And I accept this is a class as well as a gender story, but it's what I saw growing up. And they weren't all frustrated, bitter women, I'm not suggesting that. Some people were very happy to be wives and mothers. It was perfect for them. But it was just they didn't get the choice. Flash forward to the working world I entered. I mean, even then, air hostesses were still grounded when they married. Women weren't allowed to fly planes. They weren't allowed to drive trams, and one of the reasons being, seriously, because at certain times of the month, we were deemed unstable. Do you remember that? That was one of the arguments.
Don't fly Cathay Pacific because she's a private.
That's what happened to Deborah Wardley. I mean, truly, that was what they said. In my own industry, a female presenter sort of simply disappeared like that off the screen by 40 because they weren't there to work. It was there for eye candy. But what I would say is that feminism made my career possible. I'm grateful for that. It's very easy to pick out these extreme cases, but I've been to those places where the women for honour killings are struggling back from health. The best chance they have is a feminist lawyer. I won't go through the details, but Ayaan Hirsi Ali also said that the liberation of women is a big, giant house, and we in the West, she called for our help. That's a choice we can make. That's something I would argue we need to do. But I think that the really most constructive thing is to stop the opponent's view, stop cutting, dicing, over-defining and minimising what has been achieved in the name of feminism and its spirit. And I really do hope that in your heart you feel feminism has changed your lives for the better, and for the sake of all that's positive, that you will vote for the negative and agree with us that feminism has not failed. Thank you.